After my divorce, my ex-husband and his expensive lawyers made sure I lost everything. Nobody wants a homeless woman. While digging through trash, a woman approached me. "Excuse me, are you Sophia Hartfield?" When I nodded, she smiled. "Your great-uncle in New York just died. He left you his mansion, his Ferrari, and his $47 million estate. But there's one condition." I never imagined that love could turn into a courtroom battle, and that the man who once swore to protect me would one day make sure I had nowhere to sleep. My name is Sophia Hartfield, and a few years ago I was living what I thought was an ordinary but happy life. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous, but I had a husband, a home, and a belief that I was building something meaningful. Turns out, I was just building his dream, not mine. Michael, my ex-husband, was the kind of man who made people believe he was charming. He had this calm smile, the one that could win over anyone in a room. When we first met, I was working as a junior interior designer for a small firm in Boston. He walked into our office one afternoon, wanting a design consultation for his new investment property. From the first moment, he seemed too perfect, confident, kind, and successful. He owned a growing tech company and was already making more money than I could ever imagine. But he never made me feel small, at least not in the beginning. We married 2 years later. It was a small wedding, nothing extravagant. I didn't care about luxury. I cared about having someone who made me feel seen. For the first few years, things were good. We traveled, laughed, and even started planning to have children. But slowly, something changed. It wasn't one big fight or betrayal. It was small things. Comments about my spending, my clothes, how I spoke in public. At first, I thought he was just stressed. His business was expanding, and he worked long hours. But over time, it became clear. His success had changed him, or maybe it had simply revealed who he always was. I became an accessory in his world, a reflection of his status. The man who used to bring me flowers now brought home criticisms. "Sophia, you don't understand how money works," he would say. Or, "You're lucky I handle everything. You wouldn't survive without me." I used to laugh it off, tell myself it was just his way of protecting me. But deep down, I started to feel smaller, invisible. Then one day, everything fell apart. I discovered that he had been seeing someone else, a woman from his company. Younger, ambitious, and exactly the kind of person he always admired in others. I confronted him. It wasn't dramatic. I just asked if it was true. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look guilty. He simply said, "Sophia, I need someone who understands my world now. You're too soft." Those words cut deeper than any betrayal could. I packed a few things and left that night, thinking I'd start over. But I had no idea how carefully he had planned everything behind the scenes. The next morning, I tried to withdraw money from our joint account. It was empty. My credit cards were blocked. My name had been quietly removed from the house deed months ago, a business move he had made for tax purposes, he once told me. When I called my lawyer, she told me his team had already filed for divorce, claiming I had been financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable. He even submitted fake statements to make it look like I had been spending recklessly behind his back. I was blindsided. The court process dragged on for months. I fought as best as I could with what little I had, but Michael had a team of high-priced lawyers who knew how to twist everything. They painted me as a dependent woman who contributed nothing to the marriage. Every piece of my life, my emails, my messages, even my therapy records, was dissected and used against me. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had nothing. No home, no savings, not even my car. The court granted him everything because it was his property. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like a ghost of myself. For the next few months, I drifted. I stayed on a friend's couch, then another. But pity has an expiration date. Friends moved on with their lives. I couldn't find work. My confidence was shattered, and every interview ended with polite smiles and rejection emails. I tried to stay positive, telling myself that it was temporary. But one morning, when I woke up in a shelter, surrounded by the soft snores of other women who had also lost everything, I realized this was my new reality. I had become homeless. The nights were the hardest. The city felt cold even in summer. I used to walk for hours, just to stay awake, afraid of being alone in the dark. I found quiet corners near restaurants where the smell of food almost made me feel human again. Sometimes I'd wait behind bakeries for them to throw out unsold bread. I wasn't proud. I just needed to survive. One rainy evening, I was sitting behind a grocery store digging through a bag of discarded fruits. I remember the taste of a bruised apple. It was sour but real, something I could hold on to. That's when I heard footsteps. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said softly. I froze. I didn't want trouble. Usually, people avoided looking at me. A woman with messy hair, wearing torn clothes, invisible to the world. But this woman didn't walk away. She stepped closer, holding an umbrella over both of us. Her perfume was light, floral. I looked up and she smiled gently. "Are you Sophia Hartfield?" For a moment, I thought I misheard her. No one had said my full name in months. I nodded slowly, unsure what to expect. The woman's smile widened, but there was something cautious in her eyes. "My name is Evelyn. I've been looking for you." "Looking for me?" I repeated, still confused. "Yes," she said, lowering her voice. "Your great-uncle in New York passed away. He left you his estate," I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, more like disbelief. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. "I don't have any family. My parents died when I was a teenager. I've never even met a great-uncle." But she shook her head and handed me an envelope. It was slightly wet from the rain, but the paper looked official. The words "Law Offices of Raymond and Sloan" were printed at the top. "Mr. William Hartfield," she said gently, "was your father's uncle. He passed away 2 weeks ago. You're his only living heir." I remember staring at her, trying to process the words. My mind couldn't keep up. I was exhausted, hungry, and half convinced this was some kind of cruel trick. "Why would he leave me anything?" I asked quietly. "I think," she said, "that's something you'll want to read about yourself." I hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside was a letter, not a long one, just a few paragraphs. It said that I had inherited everything William Hartfield owned: a mansion in New York, his car, and a financial estate valued at $47 million. $47 million. The number felt like fiction. My heart was racing. But before I could even speak, Evelyn added one last thing. "There's one condition," she said carefully. "You'll have to hear it from the executor directly. But if you accept it, the inheritance is yours." Her words hung in the air like a riddle. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. After months of sleeping on sidewalks, I suddenly had a reason to stand again. I didn't know what the condition was, or why a man I never met would choose me, but something inside me shifted that night. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen again, about having a chance to take back what life, and Michael, had stolen from me. Evelyn gave me her card and told me to meet her at her office the next morning. Before leaving, she looked at me for a long moment. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she said softly. I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat under a bus shelter, watching the rain fall in slow silver lines. For the first time in years, I let myself hope. I didn't know where this new path would lead, but I knew one thing. My story wasn't over, and maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of my calm revenge. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying Evelyn's words. "You've inherited $47 million. The number still sounded absurd, like something from a movie. I kept half expecting to wake up and realize it had been a dream born out of hunger and exhaustion. But the card in my hand, slightly smudged from the rain, was real. So was the address written on it. Raymond and Sloan, Attorneys at Law, 17th Street, downtown. I washed my face in a public restroom and did my best to make myself look presentable. My reflection startled me. My hair was uneven, my eyes were hollow, and my clothes looked like they'd been through a storm, which, technically, they had. Still, I straightened my posture and told myself that for once, I was going to walk into a place not as a victim, but as someone who might actually belong there. When I reached the building, I hesitated. It was tall and modern, with a glass front that reflected the city like a mirror. I saw myself, small, out of place, holding onto a paper bag with everything I owned. I almost turned back, but something stronger than fear kept me there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe pride, or maybe just the quiet whisper that said, "You deserve a second chance." Inside, everything smelled of coffee and fresh paper. The receptionist looked up as I approached, her smile polite but cautious. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said softly. "I'm here to see Evelyn. She's expecting me." The woman nodded and made a quick call before gesturing toward the elevators. 17th floor, ma'am. She's waiting, ma'am." That word sounded strange again, like I had stepped into someone else's life. When the elevator doors opened, Evelyn was standing there, holding a folder. She looked just as composed as the night before, but in daylight I noticed how kind her eyes were. "Sophia," she said warmly, "I'm glad you came." "Honestly," I said, half smiling, "I'm still not sure this is real." She laughed softly. "You wouldn't be the first person to think that." She led me into a glass-walled conference room where another man was waiting, tall, gray-haired, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but not showy. "This is Mr. Raymond," Evelyn said. "He's the executor of your great-uncle's estate." The man shook my hand with firm politeness. "Ms. Hartfield, I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I murmured, though I had no memory of ever meeting the man we were discussing. He opened a thick envelope and pulled out several documents. "Your great-uncle, Mr. William Hartfield, left a clear will. He was a private man, lived alone most of his life, but he was also particular about who would inherit his estate." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. Raymond continued. "He left everything, his mansion in upstate New York, his collection of cars, and an investment portfolio valued at $47 million, to you. But as Evelyn mentioned, there's one condition." I leaned forward. "What kind of condition?" He smiled faintly, like he'd been asked that question 1,000 times. "Mr. Hartfield's will specifies that before you can access the inheritance, you must live in his mansion for a full year, continuously. During that time, you must also oversee the restoration of the property, which has fallen into neglect over the years. Only after completing this period, and submitting proof that the house has been fully restored, will the estate be transferred to your name." I blinked. "A year, live in the mansion?" "Yes," he said. "No leasing, no leaving for long periods. You must reside there full time. It's all detailed here." He slid a contract toward me. It felt overwhelming, but also strangely poetic. A mansion after months of sleeping on sidewalks, a place that was mine, if I could endure 1 year. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. Raymond hesitated. "There's one more clause. During that year, you cannot sell any part of the property or liquidate the investments. You must personally manage the restoration. Mr. Hartfield wanted his heir to understand the value of rebuilding, not just inheriting." I thought about that word, rebuilding. It hit a nerve, because that's exactly what I needed to do, rebuild my life. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll do it." Evelyn's expression softened. "You'll be starting over, Sophia. That's not always easy. Are you sure you're ready for it?" I gave a small smile. "I've slept on concrete and eaten from trash cans. I can handle a mansion." For the first time in months, I saw them both smile genuinely. We spent the rest of the morning going through paperwork. Evelyn explained that the estate was located in a town called Coldridge, about 3 hours north of New York City. The mansion sat on 15 acres of land, surrounded by forests. "It's isolated," she said, "but beautiful, if you don't mind a little quiet." Quiet sounded perfect to me. By late afternoon, they handed me the keys. Heavy, old-fashioned brass keys, and a folder with directions and contact information for a caretaker named Mr. Davis, who had been looking after the grounds. I stared at the keys in my hand, feeling their weight. It was as if the universe had handed me not just a second chance, but a challenge. That night, Evelyn arranged for me to stay in a small hotel before heading north in the morning. I took my first hot shower in months. The water stung my skin, but I didn't care. I stayed under it until the mirror fogged up and the smell of the street finally washed away. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the mansion. My great-uncle, the year ahead, and Michael, my ex-husband, who was probably sitting in his penthouse sipping wine, convinced I was somewhere still crawling through the dirt. He had no idea that his homeless ex-wife was about to inherit a fortune. I smiled at the thought, not out of bitterness, but quiet satisfaction. Revenge didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just living well while the people who tried to destroy you watched in silence. The next morning, Evelyn drove me part of the way before I switched to a rental car. The road to Coldridge wound through green hills and misty valleys. I hadn't driven in so long that I almost forgot how peaceful silence could feel when it wasn't lonely. The highway gradually turned into a narrow country road lined with tall trees. I followed the directions until I reached a black iron gate. A faded sign read, Hartfield Estate. The gates creaked open after I pressed the intercom, and I drove up a long driveway overgrown with ivy. When the mansion came into view, I stopped the car. It was breathtaking. Even from a distance, I could see the age and grandeur, tall stone pillars, arched windows, and a roof that had once been majestic, but was now losing its tiles to time. Vines crawled up the walls, and the fountain in front was dry and cracked. But it was beautiful, in the way forgotten things are. An older man stepped out of a small side house near the gate. He wore a worn brown coat and a cap. "Miss Hartfield?" he called. "Yes," I said, stepping out of the car. He nodded respectfully. "I'm Davis, groundskeeper here for 30 years. Been waiting for someone to bring this place back to life." His words warmed me. "I'll try my best," I said. He smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can do." He showed me around the mansion. The inside smelled of dust and old memories. Furniture was still covered in white sheets. Paint was peeling in places. The kitchen looked frozen in time, like no one had touched anything in decades. But beneath the decay, there was elegance. Marble floors, chandeliers, hand-carved railings. "This place used to host grand parties," Davis said, looking around wistfully. "Your uncle didn't have much family left. Maybe that's why he wanted someone like you to have it." That night, I walked through the empty halls with a flashlight. My footsteps echoed softly. Every room told a story. Faded photographs, stacks of books, a piano that hadn't been played in years. I found a small bedroom upstairs that felt less intimidating and decided to sleep there. I wrapped myself in an old blanket and looked out the window. The forest beyond the house whispered with the wind. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. I had a roof, a purpose, a beginning. Still, as I closed my eyes, a small voice whispered, "Why me? Why would a man I never met leave me everything he owned? And what would this 1 year really bring?" I didn't know yet that the mansion held secrets of its own, and that my calm revenge, the quiet justice I didn't even know I wanted, was just beginning to take shape. If you felt connected to Sophia's journey of rediscovery and strength, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my calm revenge. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was spilling through the dusty curtains, turning the air golden. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The soft creak of the old house, the faint smell of cedar and dust. It all felt like another dream. Then I saw the brass keys on the nightstand, the faded wallpaper, and the quiet vastness around me. I remembered. I was no longer homeless. I was standing at the beginning of something completely new. The first thing I did was walk through the mansion again, this time in daylight. The more I saw, the more I realized how much care it would take to bring this place back to life. Paint was peeling in long curls, wallpaper faded to ghostly patterns, floors warped by time. But under it all was beauty. Solid oak beams, elegant molding, crystal fixtures dulled but intact. Every detail whispered that once, this home had been full of laughter, music, and people who cared about it. Mr. Davis, the caretaker, was waiting in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He'd made coffee and strong and bitter, but it felt like luxury after the months I'd spent surviving on scraps. Morning. Miss Hartfield, he said with a polite nod. Please, I said, smiling. Just call me Sophia. He smiled back, a little hesitant. All right, Sophia. I figured we could start with a walk around the grounds today. See what needs attention first. I nodded, grateful for his quiet practicality. There was something comforting about his calm presence, like he had weathered storms of his own. Outside, the air smelled of pine and earth. The gardens were wild, flowers growing where they pleased, ivy overtaking the stone walls. It reminded me of myself, abandoned, messy, but still alive. Your uncle loved this place, Davis said as we walked. He used to say every stone here had a memory. Said family was a strange thing. It could vanish, but roots stay deep. I wondered what kind of man my great-uncle had been. No one had ever told me about him. My parents died when I was 17, and after that I'd been mostly alone. Did he ever mention me? I asked quietly. Only once, Davis said after a pause. Said he wished he'd known you. That maybe you were the last good thing left of his family. I didn't know how to respond. His words made something ache deep in my chest. The kind of ache that comes when someone you never met somehow believes in you. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work. I spent my days cleaning, scrubbing, organizing, and making lists of repairs. Evelyn helped me set up accounts so the estate could cover restoration costs. She came by often, sometimes with contractors, sometimes just to check how I was holding up. I could tell she cared beyond her job. She'd stay for tea and listen as I told her about little discoveries. An old diary found behind a drawer, faded photographs of a woman with soft eyes and a stern smile. I suspected she might have been my great-uncle's wife, though Davis said she'd passed away long before. Restoring the mansion wasn't just physical work. It was emotional healing. Every nail I hammered, every corner I dusted, every light I turned back on. It felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that Michael had tried to erase. For years, I'd been told I wasn't capable of anything on my own. Now, with paint-streaked hands and aching muscles, I felt the quiet power of doing something for myself. Sometimes at night, I'd sit by the large fireplace in the study with a cup of tea and just listen. The house was full of small sounds: creaking wood, the sigh of wind through the chimney, the occasional tap of branches on the window. At first it felt eerie, then slowly it began to feel like companionship, as if the mansion itself was waking up after a long sleep, grateful to be seen again. One evening, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found an old metal chest locked with a heavy clasp. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, were letters tied with a ribbon. They were addressed to my dearest Evelyn. For a moment I froze. My lawyer's name was Evelyn too, but the handwriting was from decades ago. I sat on the floor, unfolding one of the letters carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were tender, full of love and regret. My great-uncle had written them during the war, to a woman he loved but apparently lost. Reading them felt like listening to someone whisper from the past. I spent hours there, surrounded by dust and memories. The letters spoke of choices, losses, and a desire to leave something meaningful behind. It made me realize that maybe his decision to give me this inheritance wasn't random. Maybe he'd wanted to give someone else the chance to rebuild, to start again where he couldn't. As the house slowly transformed, so did I. My days found rhythm: early mornings, steady work, and peaceful nights. I even began keeping a journal again. It was something I hadn't done since before the divorce. Writing helped me process the quiet anger I still carried. Not burning rage, but a slow ember of injustice that refused to die out. Sometimes I'd think about Michael. I'd picture his confident smirk, his expensive suits, his glass office overlooking the city. I used to replay our arguments in my head, imagining what I should have said. But lately my thoughts about him had changed. He no longer haunted me like a ghost. Instead, he became a reference point, a reminder of who I used to be and who I refused to become again. Still, revenge lingered in my mind, not as violence or vengeance, but as something quieter. The idea of showing the world, and him, that I had rebuilt myself into someone untouchable. I didn't know how yet, but the seed had been planted. A few months later, the restoration was well underway. The mansion's gray exterior gleamed after new paint. The fountain had water again, sparkling under the sunlight. The gardens began to breathe. Evelyn visited one afternoon and was visibly impressed. "You've done more in 3 months than most people would in a year," she said. "I guess I needed this," I admitted. "The house, the work, the silence. It's been healing." She smiled, then hesitated. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the year ends?" I shrugged. "I haven't planned that far. Maybe I'll sell the house, travel, start a foundation, or maybe I'll just rest." She nodded thoughtfully. "Whatever you choose, I think your great-uncle would be proud." That night, I received an unexpected email. It was from a former colleague from my design days. "Sophia," it read, "I saw your name in an article about historical home restoration in Coldridge. That's incredible. I'm working on a magazine feature about reclaimed estates. Can I interview you?" I reread the message several times. Somehow word had already spread. My heart raced with nervous excitement. Maybe this was it. The chance to step back into the world, on my own terms. The interview happened a week later. The journalist, a kind young woman, asked about my journey. I didn't tell her everything. Not about the divorce or homelessness. But I spoke about rebuilding, resilience, and inheritance. The article came out a month later under the title, "The Woman Who Brought Hartfield Mansion Back to Life." It went viral in a quiet way. Not sensational, but inspiring. People wrote to me, thanking me for reminding them that starting over was possible. One evening, while scrolling through messages, I saw a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Michael. The email subject line read, "Proud of you, Sophia." For a moment, my chest tightened. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It said, "I saw the article. I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've come a long way. Maybe we could meet and talk? I've been thinking about you." I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with disbelief. This was the same man who'd taken everything from me, the man who'd watched me crumble and hadn't looked back. And now, suddenly, I was impressive again. I didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day. But his message lingered in my mind like a whisper from the past I wasn't ready to erase. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was clarity. I finally saw him for what he was. A man who valued people only when they reflected his success. I realized I didn't need to scream or confront him. My silence, my peace, and my success were louder than anything I could say. Still, part of me wanted closure. Not for him, but for me. I wanted him to see the woman he'd underestimated, the woman who'd survived without him, the woman he once told wouldn't last a week alone, now owning a mansion and a legacy. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to regret letting me go. That night, as the fire flickered in the grand fireplace, I looked around the room, at the polished floors, the warm lights, the calm air. I whispered to myself, "You're home now, Sophia." And in that whisper, there was power, quiet, deep, unshakable. I didn't know it yet, but the next step in my journey, the real revenge, was about to begin. Because when Michael reached out again, the universe handed me a perfect opportunity to show him exactly who I'd become. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was already filtering through the long lace curtains, painting golden patterns on the walls. I had slept for almost 12 hours. It was the first time in years that I had slept without fear, without hunger gnawing at my stomach, without the dread of tomorrow waiting like a dark cloud. For a few seconds, I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that all of this was real. The soft sheets, the silence of the mansion, the faint smell of lavender from the garden drifting in through the half-open window. All of it felt like something borrowed from another woman's life. But the moment I stepped out of bed and saw my reflection in the mirror, I realized this was me now. The same Sophia who once had to wash in gas station bathrooms now stood barefoot in a room larger than her old apartment. I looked tired, yes, but also determined. I whispered to myself, "You've been given a second chance, Sophia." Don't waste it. After breakfast, a real breakfast, not leftover sandwiches from the trash, I called the lawyer, Mr. Alden. His voice was calm and reassuring as he explained the next steps. There were still legal formalities regarding the estate transfer. You have full control of the mansion now, he said. But I must remind you again of your great-uncle's condition. Before you can officially access the full inheritance, the $47 million, you need to complete what he called the promise. I frowned. You mentioned that before, but what exactly does it mean? There was a pause on the other side. Your great-uncle was a man of peculiar beliefs, he replied. He said that wealth without purpose corrupts. In his will, he requested that his heir must rebuild a broken life, not just financially, but emotionally, before accepting the inheritance. He left no details on how to prove it, but he said his attorney in New York would know when the time came. Rebuild a broken life, I repeated quietly. I wasn't sure if that meant rebuilding my own, or helping someone else rebuild theirs. Mr. Alden added, There's one more thing. Your ex-husband tried to challenge the will through a private investigator. He's been asking questions about you. I suggest you be cautious. My heart tightened. Even now, after destroying me, Michael couldn't leave me alone. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had something he couldn't control, my dignity, my strength, and now, the truth that his version of justice had finally failed him. That day, I began to explore the mansion more carefully. Every corner carried echoes of a life once lived. Portraits of my great-uncle in his youth, handwritten letters on his study desk, and photographs of people I didn't recognize. I found a locked drawer with a note on top that simply said, "You'll know when you're ready." I smiled at the mystery of it. In the evening, I walked through the garden, following the winding path that led to a small glass greenhouse. Inside, everything was overgrown, vines twisting up broken trellises, flowers blooming wild. Yet there was beauty in the chaos. As I stood there, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and soil, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For so long I had lived in survival mode. Now, for the first time, I was learning how to live. Over the next few weeks, I adjusted to this new world slowly. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I took long walks in the mornings, learning the rhythm of the small town nearby. I volunteered at a local shelter, where women who had lost their homes, much like I once had, came seeking help. At first, I thought I was there to donate money, but what they needed wasn't wealth. It was someone to listen, someone who didn't judge. One of them, a quiet woman named Lydia, reminded me painfully of myself. She was about my age, with tired eyes that still held a flicker of hope. She told me how her husband had left her with nothing but debts. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered one day. I smiled faintly. "You're not, and you won't be forever." Helping her gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. Maybe this was what my great-uncle meant, to rebuild broken lives, including my own. But peace didn't last long. One afternoon, I received an envelope at the gate. It wasn't from the lawyer. Inside was a photograph of me leaving the shelter, with a note written in sharp, angry handwriting. "You think you can hide from me? You owe me everything. Michael." I sat down, trembling slightly, the weight of old fear trying to return. But I reminded myself, I wasn't the same woman anymore. I called Mr. Alden again, and he assured me that security measures were being added. "Don't engage with him," he said. "The law is on your side now." Still that night I barely slept. Memories flooded back. The court hearings, the way his lawyers had torn apart my reputation, painting me as unstable and unworthy. I remembered sitting in that courtroom, watching the man I had loved for 10 years look at me as if I were a stranger. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always come through anger. Sometimes it comes through dignity, through silence, through living well when they expect you to crumble. I started attending business workshops in the city, learning about property management and investments. The mansion had several unused properties attached to it, old rental units, a small commercial space downtown. I wanted to make them useful again, to build something sustainable, Slowly, I began renovating the buildings and turning them into safe homes for women leaving abusive marriages. It felt poetic. The house that once symbolized wealth now became a sanctuary for those who had none. Word spread quickly, and the media caught on. A small article appeared in a local paper about the Hartfield Haven, a charity project led by a woman who had once been homeless herself. When I read it, I felt an ache in my chest, pride mixed with disbelief. One evening, as I was finalizing some paperwork in the study, the phone rang. It was Mr. Alden again. His tone sounded slightly different. He was more excited. "Sophia," he said, "I received a letter from New York this morning. The executor of your great-uncle's estate believes you fulfilled the promise. They're arranging for the final release of the inheritance." I froze. "You mean it's official?" "Yes. They've reviewed your actions, your community work, and how you rebuilt your life. They're deeply impressed. The full estate is now yours. Every cent of the $47 million. I sat there for a long time, the weight of those words sinking in. Not just because of the money, but because of what it symbolized. I had gone from sleeping on park benches to creating something meaningful, something my great-uncle would have been proud of. The next day, I drove to the old part of the city, where Michael's firm was located. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I parked across the street and watched as he walked out, still in his expensive suit, still pretending to be untouchable. He didn't see me, and I didn't want him to. My revenge wasn't about confrontation. It was about this moment, me, free, successful, and no longer broken. When I returned home, I stood in front of my great-uncle's portrait in the hallway. "I think I understand now," I whispered. "Revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about rebuilding yourself until their power over you disappears." That night, as I watched the sunset from the balcony, a quiet peace settled inside me. The world outside was still full of noise, but within me, there was calm. A calm earned through pain, resilience, and truth. I knew there was still more ahead, new challenges, new people, maybe even forgiveness. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready to live it. And in the soft light of dusk, I realized that this quiet strength, was the truest form of revenge. The days that followed were quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. After the confirmation from Mr. Alden that the full inheritance was officially mine, a strange stillness filled the mansion. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm. Not empty, but heavy with meaning. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about rent, food, or survival, and yet wealth didn't feel like victory. What felt victorious was peace. The kind that couldn't be bought, couldn't be faked, and certainly couldn't be stolen by anyone, not even by someone like Michael. A week later, I sat in my great-uncle's study again, that same room filled with letters and memories. The locked drawer I'd found weeks ago was still there, untouched. Something about it kept calling to me. Maybe now, after everything, I was finally ready. I took the small brass key Mr. Alden had given me during one of our earlier meetings. He'd said it might fit something important. When I inserted it into the drawer's keyhole, it turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting all this time. Inside, there were a few envelopes, neatly stacked. One was addressed to me, written in my great-uncle's sharp handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands. "My dear Sophia," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've endured, and more importantly, you've rebuilt yourself. I never had children, and for years I feared that the family name would die with me. But when I learned of you, a young woman cast aside yet still standing, I saw in you what our family once stood for. Courage, compassion, and grace under fire." I swallowed hard, my eyes blurring. The letter continued. "The wealth I left behind was never meant to be a reward. It was a responsibility. You were meant to prove not just to others, but to yourself, that strength does not come from fortune. It comes from purpose. If you have found peace, then my trust was not misplaced." At the bottom, there was a small note written in lighter ink. Your next chapter begins now. Use this power not to look back in anger, but to light a path for others still lost in the dark. For a while, I sat there, silently tracing the edges of the paper. It felt like he was still speaking to me through those words, guiding me toward something greater than revenge, toward meaning. That night, I stood on the balcony overlooking the garden. The moonlight bathed everything in silver. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who once searched for scraps behind diners, who had lost her home, her dignity, and her faith in people. I thought about Michael and the courtrooms, and the nights when I cried myself to sleep, convinced that my life was over. But I also thought about Lydia, and the women at the shelter, and the quiet pride that came from seeing them smile again. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a single act. It wasn't a strike or a confrontation. It was a process, one that transformed pain into purpose. In the following months, I expanded the Hartfield Haven. What started as one property turned into a network of safe houses across the state. Each one was designed not just for shelter, but for healing, therapy, education, small business programs. Women learned how to rebuild their lives, how to manage finances, and how to stand on their own feet again. I hired counselors, teachers, and social workers. I even created a scholarship fund for women wanting to return to college. Every success story reminded me of my own journey, and each one whispered the same message my great-uncle had written. Use this power to light a path for others. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a charity gala, Mr. Alden called again. Sophia, I thought you should know, he said. Your ex-husband's firm has filed for bankruptcy. He made some risky investments. It's been all over the financial papers. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I asked quietly, is he okay? Mr. Alden sounded almost surprised. He's struggling, I suppose, but it seems he's alone now. His second wife left him, and several of his partners pulled out. Quite the downfall. I thanked him and ended the call. When I set my phone down, I expected to feel triumphant. After all, wasn't this what I once wanted? For him to lose everything the way I had? But instead I felt nothing. Not bitterness, not satisfaction, just quiet acceptance. Later that evening, I drove to the city. I didn't plan to see him, just to see for myself. His office building, once polished and filled with movement, looked hollow. Through the glass doors, I saw him sitting alone at a desk, papers scattered everywhere. His hair was grayer now, his posture heavier. For a few minutes, I watched. Then I turned and walked away. There was no need to speak, no need to gloat. My revenge had already happened. Not because he was suffering, but because I wasn't. Because I had rebuilt myself into someone he could never break again. A few days later, I attended the gala for the Hartfield Haven. The hall was filled with people, former residents, donors, volunteers. Lydia stood beside me wearing a simple blue dress, her face glowing with joy. She had found a job, rented her own apartment, and was now mentoring new arrivals at the shelter. When she stepped up to the microphone to share her story, her voice trembled but didn't break. This place gave me hope when I thought there was none left, she said. It reminded me that my past didn't define me, and it's all because someone believed that broken lives can be rebuilt. When she looked at me, I smiled, tears quietly forming in my eyes. That night, as I listened to their stories, I realized something deeper, that perhaps my great-uncle's inheritance wasn't meant to change my life, but to allow me to change others. The event ended late, and when everyone had left, I stepped outside. The cool night breeze brushed against my face, carrying the faint sound of laughter and music from the city. I felt alive. Not wealthy, not powerful, just alive. Sometime later, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed one last envelope on my desk. It was from Mr. Alden. Inside was an official document, confirming that the estate transition was complete, that everything was legally mine. But there was also a handwritten note from him. Your great-uncle would have been proud. You didn't just inherit his wealth. You inherited his vision. I placed the letter back into the drawer and whispered, "Thank you." Months turned into a year. The mansion became more than a home. It became a hub of activity, a place where people came to heal, to grow, to find direction. I rarely thought about Michael anymore. He was a shadow from a past life, a life that had taught me everything I needed to learn about loss, resilience, and rebirth. One Sunday morning, while walking through the garden, I met an older woman watering the flowers near the greenhouse. She looked up and smiled. "This place," she said softly, "it feels like it was built on kindness." I smiled back. "It was built on pain first. Kindness came later?" She nodded thoughtfully. "That's usually how it works." I watched her for a moment before turning toward the house, the sunlight glinting off the windows. In that reflection, I caught sight of myself. Not the broken woman I once was, but the calm, steady woman I had become. Sometimes I still wondered if revenge stories ever truly ended. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they simply evolved, from anger to peace, from darkness to light. My story hadn't ended with punishment or payback. It had ended with transformation. Now, when people asked me about my journey, I didn't talk about money or loss. I told them about survival, about finding strength when you think you have none left, and about how the greatest revenge is to live a life so full of purpose that no betrayal can touch it. And as I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with something I've learned through all the tears, mistakes, and small victories. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, or fiery or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet, graceful, and deeply human. It's waking up one morning and realizing you're finally free. If you've ever been broken, if you've ever been betrayed, remember this: your story isn't over. You can rebuild, you can rise, and you can find calm in the very place where pain once lived. Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt something in it, hope, strength, maybe even forgiveness, I invite you to share it. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more stories that remind us that the quietest revenge is sometimes the most powerful one of all.